I had one teacher who talks about Davidov's slew movements as being like opera arias. I sort of associate that movement with the Cavalleria Rusticana intermezzo, partially because of the key. So Tchaikovsky's opera Mazeppa actually sort of a requisitioned libretto. Davidov had begun composing an opera on a libretto based upon Pushkin's poem Palatva, and we actually have the letter that Tchaikovsky writes to Davidov where he more or less says, hey, I've noticed you've abandoned that work. Can I take over the libretto from this? And Davidov agrees, and the rest is history. We have a number of letters from Tchaikovsky to Davidov. They were apparently close enough for Tchaikovsky to ask Davidov for money and administrative favors. And Tchaikovsky compliments his composing. So there's an ambition in Davidov to write music that's more serious than just pretty tunes and difficult cello parts. So Andrei Ivanov, who's written the most specifically on the concertos, talks about how he uses thematic linkages, particularly in concerto, for thematic links and cyclical writing. And so to sort of paraphrase and supplement Ivanov's discussion, in Concerto Number 4, we have, in the very opening of the first movement, a preliminary theme. And it goes from there into a cadenza preview. That comes back when it's time for the actual cadenza. And the first theme of that concerto, first movement, we can see has a head motif that's comprised of these two gestures that are sort of variations on each other. So there's this up a fourth, down a fourth, which is repeated here. But if I look at the relationship between this gesture and this gesture, it's not a strict retrograde inversion, but I have these two repeated middle notes. On one end of it is a note that's a step away, a step above, a step below. And then the other end of it, there's a note that's a fifth up and a fourth down. So it's the flavor of a retrograde inversion. There's some shared genetic material between these gestures. Now, this preliminary theme also has a tie to the first theme of the last movement. Taking out the rhythm and just looking at the pitch content for the preliminary theme, there's only one accidentals difference there. So this, in the spirit of good 19th century organicism, it creates unity to the work and maybe places on multiple scales of a musical looking back or looking forward, depending on how you look at it. But he's at the same time, on other spans, he is using cyclical writing to create senses of preview and anticipation. So this preliminary theme, that becomes motivic, and it comes back at the end of the finale's coda. I've talked about the cadenza preview as an element that has a cyclical feel. Now, the most beautiful instance of this happens between the first movement's first theme and the development of the third movement. So let's actually listen to the first theme. So now let's listen to where that comes back in the finale's third theme, the finale's development. It'll be at 308. Maybe a little after. So to my ear, when it comes back with that modification, that sounds very Russian melodically, like a Rimsky-Korsakov or maybe a Mussorgsky melody. But so he's paying attention to structure here. He's not Bach or Brahms, but he's thinking about more than just fluff. So the concertos Ivanov names as primary influences on Davidov: Mendelssohn, Schumann, Chopin, Tchaikovsky. He says that there's a change in Davidov's style over the four concertos from a virtuoso style to a symphonic style. So where in the virtuosic style, the cellist is this flamboyant protagonist and very much the main thing with the orchestra being backgrounded, whereas in the symphonic style, the orchestra is more of an equal partner in what's happening. There's more creating, there's an interaction with the group, creating different colors and textures. So think of something more like the Dvorak cello concerto, where it's almost a concerto for cello and wind section. So we'll look at ways in which these pieces might have actually been influential on standard works in the cello repertoire. We have from Lev Ginsburg that he wanted to write a fifth concerto, never got to it. There's also a shorter piece, a concert allegro, in his more the style of Concerto 1, the earlier style, that's just difficult beyond all get out. So, teachers of the works, Ugo Becker, Julius Klengel, the founder of the Soviet cello school, Kozalopov, of course, Davidov himself, Piatigorsky, and Rostropovich. So why would you care about these neglected cello pieces? Well, Ivanov points out that we can see in the broader, he calls it a background, I believe, of concerto writing, the norms and practices against which we can understand the works that are real masterpieces that we listen to more today. And he says, without knowing these pieces, we're impoverished in really getting a work like the Tchaikovsky violin concerto. So it's really exciting to see someone play a hard piece well, Ivanov points out, and that was part of what helped instrumental music get popular, was virtuosity. William Pleath talks about, he was Jacqueline Dupre's cello teacher, he talks about, well, cellists like to whine about how we don't have a lot of repertoire, but really we have all these pieces written by master cellists of the past that we don't really play. So these pieces, a student of Piatigorsky, Terry King, talks about, if you're playing a piece that isn't played that much, you can't as easily just mooch your interpretation from someone else, or in today's case, from a recording. So if you want to compete in Eastern Europe, these pieces are big there. There's a Davidov competition where you better know his music. The Tchaikovsky competition requires Russian works. He never finished his method book, but as Lev Ginsburg points out, these pieces can teach you a lot of technique, so we don't need to necessarily have his finished method book in a way. So the influence of the Mendelssohn violin concerto, this five quarter note motif. Sort of like the ya-da-da-da-da-yum. We have these triplet passage work in rockets, repeated sort of like hammer blow rocket gestures up. Ya da 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 ya da. That basic idea. The use of self accompaniment in both works. The similarities between the second concerto first movement and Mendelssohn violin concerto get pointed out a lot by people who discuss those works. There's some passages where Davidov sounds like Midsummer Night's Dream. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip. Schumann influence. It also gets pointed out that isn't all that unlike the Schumann cello concerto. And there's this basic gesture that Schumann likes where you sweepingly arc through a triad and then come to rest on an appoggiatura. And in the second movement of Davidov, we saw that a lot. So similarities get pointed out in key scheme, the F major second movement in an A minor work. There's this intervening passage of double stops. In the Schumann concerto second movement, a little bit like what happens in the Davidov concerto second movement. I'm going to cut this recording.